Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Deadhead Cannabis Show. I'm Larry Mishkin of Mishkin Law in Chicago. Today is August 7th, 2023, which puts us in the middle, but more towards the end of the annual days between, right? Jerry was born on August 1st, died on August 9th, and some marketing genius has declared those days the days between. And on the Dead channel, we get a lot of Jerry concerts, which is wonderful. Great interviews with Jerry, music, other people covering Jerry's tunes. And, it's a nice celebration. It's a worthwhile celebration, especially for those of us who were always big Garcia fans. Really that was what drove all of us. I think not all of us, but certainly a lot of my group and people like Rob, I know, and others. We were always tuned into Jerry, and I love Bob, I love Phil, I love all of them, and I love seeing them still. But there was something about Jerry that was very special. So, in honor of the days between, we are going to feature some clips, some of my favorite Jerry clips on some of my favorite tunes that Jerry plays. And we'll start off with this one.
There were days, there were days, there were days when all we ever wanted was to love and learn and grow. When we grew into our shoes, they told us where to go. Walk halfway around the world on promise of the globe. Stood upon a mountain top, walked barefoot through the snow. Gave the best we had to give. How much we'll never know, never know.
So that's pretty much the appropriate tune, I think, to start off for this period of time. And it captures everything very nicely. That's from Soldier Field, July 24th, 1994, show that I was at. In fact, 4 of the 6 clips I'm going to play today were from shows I was at. No, I'm lying. 3 of the 6 clips I'm going to play, I think, were shows that I was at. And we'll talk more about that later. But this was a great one. A great version of the tune. It's a tune that I think for some of us, me especially, kind of came to be, it's acquired taste. You have to work your way through it a few times. And this was an interesting show in Chicago back in 94 because the first set ended with If the Shoe Fits, Easy Answers, and Don't Ease Me In. And then the second set was we got a Samson, Long Way to Go Home, Eyes of the World, Eternity, He's Gone, Drum Space, The Days Between, Throwing Stones Not Fade, Liberty, which at that point in time in my life was pretty run-of-the-mill, especially the Throwing Stones Not Fade, Liberty, which was always ultimately predictable when the Grateful Dead came to Chicago during those Soldier Field years, that at least one of the nights was going to go down that road. And not that we didn't enjoy the songs, but, we just kept begging them once just to, abandon that and, go into something else and really shock the hell out of us. But still well played, and that's a great Days Between. Had Jerry lived a little bit longer and had a chance to play it more, probably would have, really moved right up to the top of Jerry ballads that people love listening to and talking about. So a great way to get started. This next clip that I want to play is from a show that I wasn't at, although the very first time they covered this tune, I was at the show back in 1986, so I guess that kind of counts a little bit. It's a Dylan cover. It's Jerry interpreting Bob, and it's a great version of Visions of Johanna.
Ain't it just like tonight? Retreats when you're trying to be so quiet. Sitting there stranded tempted you to defy. Lights licking from the opposite wall. This room, the heat pipes just caught. The country music station plays soft, but there's nothing, really nothing to tune it off. Just the weed and a lover so entwined, and these visions of Joanna come to my mind.
Beautiful tune, beautiful when Bob does it, even more beautiful when Jerry does it because his voice is a little bit better. Let's not kid ourselves. So this is from the Spectrum in Philadelphia in 1995, March 18th. And what's most notable about that for me is that this is 95. We're at the end. This is the fall, the spring tour, little time off back for summer tour, and then boom, Jerry's dead. So we have all these people. When you go and you find these shows and you start to read the comments on archive.org or on the set list program that you can go to that has all the shows listed, and you read the comments, there's always people for these mid to late, 93, 94, 95 shows who bring all the negative energy and, oh, they sucked. And then, no good show since something of 92 or 91. And, these are terrible and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, look, this is who they were at that time and this is what they do. But it's a very solid version of that tune from Jerry in 1995, both in terms of remembering the words, playing it so well, and actually really sounding energetic while he was singing it. So that's a really, really, I think, a great thing to be able to hear and keep in mind that even at the end, Jerry had his good days, even if more often than we would like, he had his bad days. Again, Visions of Johanna is from the Dylan album Blonde on Blonde, came out in 1966. The Dead only covered it 8 times. And the first one was in March 19th, 1986 at Hampton Coliseum, which I was at. The last one was July 8th, 1995 at Soldier Field, which I was at, but I was not at March 18th, 1995. Why did I include that version of it then? I will tell you why. Because it's Phil's favorite version of the tune. And a few years back, Phil came out with an album called From the Phil Zone. It's a double disc set, and it's just a number of individual live tunes that Phil went through and pulled out, and has a little bit of an explanation for why he selected each one. But all sorts of different tunes live. They span all the eras. And, Phil gives his little insights on everything, but he loves this one. He goes, this was his favorite version of it. And he takes note of the fact that it was in 95 when Jerry was in failing health, and people were always saying that Jerry never had a good moment. And I don't remember the exact wording, but something like, but on this night, Jerry really showed him, or Jer, I think he always called him Jer. So, if this version of Visions of Johanna is good enough for Phil to put on his hand-selected live disc that he's putting out, it's certainly good enough for us to play today when we're remembering Jerry and honoring him for all the good things he did. And the other thing I'll say is that I'm not playing any Jerry Garcia band stuff today. And although that would certainly seem to be fitting, honoring Jerry with his own band and the stuff that he did on his birthday or on the days between, I don't disagree. But there's so many great moments of him with the Grateful Dead that it's just a shame not to focus on them. When it's the Jerry Garcia band playing, it's more a question of this great moment, this great moment, this great moment. But when it's him playing with the Grateful Dead, it's a little bit different. Not every tune is his tune. Not every tune is he stepping out on. Not every tune does he, hit the notes all so well. But on the nights when he does it with the Grateful Dead, certainly those are some of the best. And I think the one thing we'll find today that all these clips kind of have in common is that very fact that, they all come from nights when Jerry was really on. And, either, like I say, if I was at the show, then I know. And if I wasn't at the show, as you'll see from some of the later selections, they're versions of songs that are pretty much, top flight for any real Deadhead worth their salt, as they say. We've all heard these versions and we all know them, but sometimes it's just nice to stop and kind of group them together and really have some fun with it. So we're talking about Jerry today, and there's so many stories about him, and there's so many videos, and you can just go online and find them all, and they're all great. And it's kind of hard just to pick any one, um, and focus on it. I think that Rob and I, and when we do the show and when we talk about uh, Jerry or Bobby or any of them, and we start to recall our favorite moments. We love recounting moments of Jerry doing things musically, singing, dancing, forgetting the words, whatever it might be. Um, that it I don't want to say it becomes boring. It never is boring, but it just somehow it's hard. It begins to sound the same. But I think that one of the things that's really cool for any musician, just like anybody in any category, is how your peers feel about you. And the people who are doing the same thing you're doing on a regular basis, and who have the same struggles that you as a songwriter, performer, guy who's always on tour, have to go through. And it's really amazing to hear some of the things that people in the music industry and related stuff have said about Jerry over the years. Like, for instance, Vince Welnick said, "The first time I ever laid eyes on Jerry, I believed in Santa Claus. I still believe." Now, the one thing, unfortunately, I can't give you is exactly when all these quotes date from, but I'm going to, believe that this had some time to do while he was playing with the Dead, or maybe shortly thereafter, or maybe right around the time Jerry died, because we've all talked about Vince and how ultimately he got the short end of the stick for the 2015 reunion and everything else. And you know, we've heard that it was something that he never really completely bounced back from, in terms of not being upset and disappointed that after the work he did for them, that they didn't bring him in that way. And I would have to feel the same. We all grew to love Vince just like we loved Brent and everybody else. But I love this quote because it just kind of demonstrates the kid in all of them. And Santa Claus is a very universal theme, and we all know what somebody means when they say that, unless it's one of those weird bad Santa movies. But otherwise, uh, it just is what it is. And it's very nice of Vince. Dwight Yoakam, right? Well, here's a guy who's in a completely different genre of music. But his quote is, "I'll miss Jerry every time I hear the sweet sound of the pedal steel guitar he played on Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's Teach Your Children." And we've talked about that. We've talked about guys from that band who have played with the Grateful Dead, and how Jerry's played back with them, and they taught the guys in the Dead how to harmonize. And Jerry played on this song on their album for them. And um, but a guy like Dwight Yoakam, who focuses much more on the country side of music, and not quite as much on the rock and roll, shows where his roots actually lay. Right? He's very well familiar with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. He's very familiar with the fact that Garcia played on the album, and very, very complimentary of it. And I think that's a great thing too. And then we have Bruce Hornsby, who was such a may have been the seventh member of the Grateful Dead. Certainly, the amount of time he gave them after Brent died was exceptional. And those were very special shows when he was out there playing with them, and it was great to have him back in 2015. And his quote is that Garcia spoke to my jazz consciousness and symbolized freedom. Two interesting thoughts there, right? Jazz consciousness. As a musician, I see that as something that's on a slightly higher plane than maybe just your standard three-chord rock and roll. At least the way I think Bruce Hornsby is interpreting it, because he's not just. It wouldn't be fair to just label him as a rock and roll pianist. He's a real pianist, and he has exceptional talent. And uh, he plays in a number of different genres. In and out of rock and roll music, whether it's the Grateful Dead style or any of the others. And of course, symbolized freedom, because that's what the Grateful Dead were always all about. That's what Jerry was all about. He was the leader of that group in terms of, freedom. Go ahead, tape our shows. Go ahead, hang out. Go ahead, um, you know, tune in, drop out, and whatever the phrase was. I wasn't old enough to know it back then. So forgive me, people who lived in the 60s. But nevertheless, that's Jerry. And, when it's cool when a guy like Bruce Hornsby, recognizes him, A, both for his outstanding musical talents, and B, for the visions and the thoughts and the movements that really came to symbolize Jerry's life, and what he did stand for people when he was out there playing and doing all of his great stuff. Rock Scully, who was a manager for the band basically from 65 to 85, and then was in and out with them for a while after that, and had some hard feelings, and sometimes they tried to make it up. And Rock passed away from cancer a few years back, and I certainly can't tell you how things were left between and among them all. But there's no doubt that he was a significant part of the band, during a very significant portion of their career. Rock Scully says Jerry was the Grateful Dead, not because he was the band's unofficial leader or its icon, but because of his noble spirit and stupefying resilience. And that's interesting to say about somebody's stupefying resilience. Well, that's true. Jerry just had the ability to come back again and again and again. If they had a bad night, it didn't matter. If they had a good night, he was still coming back out. If the cops came out and busted him, he still would come back the next night and play. He went into a coma and, within months was back playing again. And then it happened a second time. He was a very resilient man. And given his drug habits and the levels of consumption over the last 20 plus years of his life, it's amazing that he showed the resilience to live as long as he did. And, we all just wish he would have been around a little bit longer and could have done his thing a little bit more. But we're happy for what we had with him and from him, and have to agree with Rock Scully on this, that he did have a very noble spirit, and his resilience was both amazing and motivating and a little bit scary. There's John Perry Barlow, who, of course, was uh, the great lyricist for so many of Bob Weir's tunes. And he said, somebody asked me in an interview right before Jerry died what it was like to know Jerry Garcia. The question hit me strange. I thought about all the ways in which he and his various manifestations had woven themselves into my life over the last 30 years. And I said, God, I can't imagine what it would be like not to know Jerry Garcia. And yeah, that's I think there's a reason why Deadheads always kind of imagined that, they were going to turn the corner and wander into a little party where Jerry was hanging out, and he'd look up and say, hey, man, come join us. And, you'd get to know Jerry too. A lot of people are afraid, I think, ultimately to meet their rock and roll heroes, because you just don't know if the rock and roll heroes are going to be assholes or approachable people, or what they're going to be like. And, guys like John Perry Barlow, well, admittedly, he was very deep into the family at that point. But my sense is that Jerry was that way with everybody he met, and that he was not very judgmental of people, and if you weren't bothering him, he wasn't around to be bothering you, and that would be an amazing type of person to know. But for many of us, it was not the way. We only know him through his music, and the other parts we've heard about him and seen about him, but there may be nobody other than his daughters and other family members who knows him better than Mountain Girl. Um, Mountain Girl, who was his first wife, and such an integral part of uh, the early years of the Grateful Dead, and everything that they did as they were, just kind of like moving in together, all of them, and really forming their community. And the role that she played so deep and woven that even after she and Jerry broke up, she remained a part of the family and part of the inner circle right up until the very end. She was one of the original Ken Kesey uh, pranksters, and part of the whole psychedelic movement, and definitely somebody who was, no matter how many other people Jerry married, I think it was always kind of hard, ultimately not to imagine him with her. And her quote was just to quote, in fact, one of the greatest lyricists of all time, saying, we'll meet again someday on the avenue. Which is very appropriate, because I'm sure that her karmic spirit absolutely believes that she and Jerry are meant to be together, and they will meet again someday. Um, but this is also a little nod, I think, to Jerry and his interpretation of "Tangled Up in Blue," a Bob Dylan classic that we all know Jerry loved to play, and became a regular part of the playing of his songbook, playing with the Jerry Garcia band. So it's both nice and lovely and appropriate. And, again, for Mountain Girl, who had a very special relationship with Jerry, is particularly meaningful. So let's dive back into all of our music here. And the next one we have is another Jerry favorite of mine. It is actually considered a Jerry Garcia tune because it came off a Jerry Garcia album, but the Dead did get around to playing it. So let's listen to Comes the Time.
and feel it all. Comes a time when the blind man takes your hand, says, don't you see? Gotta make it fun on the dreams. Still believe, don't give it up. And every time, only love can fill. Only love can fill.
So that comes a time, and that's the Starlight Theater in Kansas City on September 3rd, 1985, a show that Rob and I talk about often. It's part of that summer of 85 stretch when the band was really killing it, and they had jumped back into that set for the other one and the full boat on that. And they were pulling out some old classics, and Comes a Time was one of them that they did pull out. And those of us that were all going to law school at the University of Missouri at the time and were smart enough and lucky enough to be able to drive 2 hours west to Kansas City, except for my buddy Mark, who drove all the way from St. Louis and met us in Columbia, Missouri, and headed the rest of the way over there with us. My good buddy Casey was there. We had a whole group of people, and it's really one of the best shows, I think, of 1985 and maybe of the entire 1980s. But this Comes a Time from that night. It was really, really classic and well worth featuring today. Again, as we think about, try to remember Jerry. The tune is from his solo album Reflections, which came out in 1976. It was his third solo album. But interestingly enough, partway through the production, he stopped recording with his solo band and brought in the members of the Grateful Dead, who performed on 4 songs plus a bonus jam from 2000 for the 2004 re-release. 3 of the 4 Grateful Dead performer songs had earlier live debuts, Comes a Time being one of them, which debuted in 1971. They Love Each Other, which debuted in 1973. And It Must Have Been the Roses, which debuted in 1974. Might As Well entered their rotation in 1976, and Mission in the Rain received a few select performances that same year, but not much more after that. So this was a Garcia album that was basically test-driven by the Grateful Dead. It appeared a total of 66 times over the Grateful Dead's 30 years, and it was not uncommon for them to play it in short bursts, so 3 times in 10 shows maybe, and then they'd go several hundred shows before it would make another appearance. It was first performed on October 19th, 1971 at Northrop Hall, at the original U, the U of Minnesota. Sky U Ma, Rah, 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 and all that good stuff. And that's actually a night when the Dead broke out a number of tunes. It's worth it to go to archive.org and check out October 19th, 1971 from Minneapolis. And you'll hear and be amazed at how good everything sounds and how early it is that they're playing some of these tunes. But again, this being one of them, this is 5 years before the album dropped. And it was played for the last time on October 9th, 1994 at US Air Arena in Landover, Maryland. And then unfortunately, for the next 10 months or so that were left, dropped out of the rotation again, and we didn't get to hear it anymore. Now, the next song is from a show that I did not see. But my good buddy Mikey was there, and it's always been one of my favorites back when we were collecting tapes, and right up to the present, where if I just have some time at hand and I want to listen, I will drop on set 2, and it begins like this. classic version of one of their classic tunes. Again, from April 6, 1982, the Spectrum in Philadelphia. They later released the show in their Road Trips series, and I couldn't remember, I can't tell you what volume and number it was, but it's easily found online with the Grateful Dead store. It's a tremendous show all the way through. I could have really picked anything but that guitar, and notice no vocals were necessary there. The guitar, there's two or three excellent guitar solos in this version, and he just slides in and out of them effortlessly. They're all wonderful. It is a classic 1980s Jerry Garcia sound on his guitar with the wah-wahs going strong, and I really love the interplay between he and Brent. Again, this is still relatively early in Brent's tenure with the band, just basically going on 3 years at this point. And, he and Jerry are, trading licks and leads as they go through the jamming of the tune very effortlessly. And it's fun to listen to. And we've often talked about how they inspired one another. And I think that this is another really great example of that. So let's dive back in for a minute, I think, because I pulled down a few more of these quotes from people talking about Jerry, and there were, the website that I went to directed me to about 80 or 85 of them, and probably 20 or 30 of them were you could live with them or without them, but there were very, very many that were good. But I can't just be sitting here all day reading quotes. But I felt like I could not read the rest of these, so let's just go through them here. Branford Marsalis, famous sax player who became a fan favorite, Deadhead favorite on those occasions when he would sit in with the band on their Eyes of the World from March 1989 out on Long Island, I think is still one of my all-time favorites that they've ever played, and it's just amazing. He's incredible, and putting him together with the Grateful Dead is something else. He says, "This is not a excuse me. There is not a sentence in the world that could respectfully do justice to the life and music of Jerry Garcia." And that's a pretty heavy statement if you think about it. Branford Marsalis is in the business of making statements to people musically, of course, but um, he's saying that Jerry's bigger than that. Jerry's beyond that, and right, you can't really use words to do him justice. You have to be there. You have to have heard him. You have to have been on stage playing with him. You have to have experienced all that kind of stuff that he brings to the table. And when you do, then how can you possibly go back and sum it up in just one sentence, one word, one anything? You can't. Bob Dylan says, "There's no way to measure Jerry's greatness or magnitude as a person or as a player. He really had no equal. His playing was moody, awesome, sophisticated, hypnotic, and subtle. There's no way to convey the loss." Obviously, statement made at the time of Jerry's passing. And think about this for a minute. There's no way to measure his greatness or magnitude as a person or as a player. He really had no equal. Now, this is Bob Dylan talking, and I love Jerry, but I think there's so many people out there who would say that Bob Dylan is the epitome of the ultimate, you know, defining rock and roller of all time. His songs that everybody plays, and his style, and his independence, and his breakaway from the what he saw as more confining acoustical style, and branching out into electric at the Newport Jazz Festival, and feeling the wrath of the crowd as he did it. And writing songs that the Dead covered forever, so many of them that there's albums of Grateful Dead covers of Bob Dylan tunes. And Bob Dylan is saying that, Jerry, there's no way to measure Jerry's greatness or magnitude as a person, and that Bob Dylan's saying Jerry had no equal. That would be like, if you're a basketball player and, Michael Jordan says, yeah, Dan Hummiston had no equal, and I mean, Michael Jordan, well, for God's sakes, if he's saying it, how can you be saying it like that? And Dan's a good player, don't get me wrong, but, I mean, this is just, I read this kind of stuff, and, it really makes me, I don't want to say it makes me proud. I mean, Jerry was just this wonderful musician to me, but, it was very reaffirming, all of these strong feelings that we all had about Jerry and who he was, and who he was as a person, and who he was as a musician, and how amazing his tunes were. And, were we really the crazy ones driving all around the country to hear him play? Or were we the smart ones knowing that, 10 years after he died, all of a sudden it would be very retro to totally love Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead. And, everybody would want to say that they had been at all of those shows, but we were really there. And, Bob Dylan, man, that's fantastic. Jerry's bandmate and little buddy for years. Bob Weir says, I see Jerry in my dreams all the time. I hear him when I'm on stage. I would say I can't talk to him, but I can. I don't miss him. He's here. He's with me. And of course, what else is Bob Weir going to say, right? I love that. That's classic Bobby. You know, he's talking sense and nonsense at the same time, but he's talking from the heart, and we all know what he means. And it was had to be very strange for Bob Weir because I think that Bob was very comfortable in his role in the Grateful Dead, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. That they were all equally important, and they were all. And Bob still is a tremendous musicians, and but it's like talking about Susan Tedeschi, playing standing right next to her husband Derek Trucks, who's the greatest guitar player in the world. So when you want to, otherwise any night we would all be staring at her, a beautiful woman with an amazing voice who plays guitar practically better than anybody except the guy standing next to her. And Bob Weir was an amazing rock and roller and still is. And I'm glad that he's had his time to shine without Jerry, although I wish still he would play fewer Jerry tunes and more Bobby tunes. But he's had his time to shine, and I think he's done a marvelous job in many respects. Leading Rat Dog, leading Bob Weir and the Wolf Brothers, and certainly, of course, leading Dead and Company, playing in Further, playing, in all of these other bands. He's the one guy who's been in all of them as they've come along, and it's wonderful that. He feels so close to all of that. It's still such a meaningful part for him, and um, you know, we all go out there to still see the Dead and Co shows and all these other shows because seeing Bob Weir is seeing the Grateful Dead. And even if it's a day at the time, we were all Jerry fans, and if we had our way, um, there would all be Jerry tunes, and Jerry would just play all night, and Bobby would fill in his background, and maybe at the end throw in a Sugar Magnolia, and we'd all go home with a smile on our face. But Bobby more than earned his place in the band, and earned his way into the hearts and the gratitude of all the Deadheads everywhere. And he's the surviving, the of the two of them, he's the surviving member. And I would say he hasn't disappointed. But I love hearing him talk like that, and expressing how close he was to Garcia and how important uh, you know Garcia was, and he's just not ready to say goodbye. And if he's not, then I'm not. And now here's a good one, right? Because everybody talks about Fish and everybody talks about Trey, and Trey played at the 2015 reunion. And Trey is what Trey today is where Jerry would have been back in the day if he hadn't overdosed and died, if he had been able to extricate himself from the terrible condition that he had that just would not let him walk away from the claws, if you will, of heroin and other drugs that were so terrible and dangerous and took so many rockers' lives. And you can say, well, yeah, we got Jerry 30 years longer, almost in the 27 club, but we didn't get him as long as we could have. And I think Trey's a great example. And we've talked about that in the past. And Trey and his bandmates just made a conscious decision that being a touring band was not compatible with helping somebody try and kick this type of addiction. And to their credit, they took the time that was necessary for Trey to get better, and whatever the other ones wanted to do, and take care of during that period of time. And they've come back stronger and better than ever. And it's amazing to see as they enter their late 50s and early 60s how much incredible energy they still have. And while they may be not a half a step, let's say a quarter step slower than they used to be, they still play with a wonderful energy, and they still play with a great excitement, and they still play amazing shows. And God bless Trey Anastasio and those guys. It's a great band, and my only wish is I would have dived into the whole scene a little bit sooner. But I'm happy to take him when I can get him. So Trey says about Jerry that Jerry was a very gentle and unassuming man who brought so much joy and love into people's lives through music. I can't think of a more profound and beautiful accomplishment at the end of a lifetime. And what's amazing about that is he's absolutely right in so many ways. He's right about that for any person. Uh, he's right about that for Jerry Garcia. And they're going to say the same thing about Trey Anastasio someday. They're going to say that we can't think of, you know, that Trey was a gentle, unassuming man who brought so much joy and love into people's lives through music. And it's amazing that Trey sees it in Jerry, and my guess is if you try to ask Trey if he saw it himself, that he would be a little more unassuming, and Trey's never really bought into any of that stuff. A lot of the same way that Jerry never bought into it. Not out there hawking stuff on TV and showing up in all of the periodicals and you know paparazzi magazines and that kind of stuff. They go, they play their music, they have their families, they do their thing. And, Trey, if there's any human being alive, I think, who can relate to what it feels like to be Jerry Garcia, I would say that Trey has to be, in the top one, two, or three uh, candidates for that because he has, with his bandmates, built a musical juggernaut that maybe isn't quite as big and overwhelming as the Grateful Dead, but certainly big enough and with a wonderful community and their own fish heads and everything that they do and that they've taken the ideas of the Grateful Dead and transformed it into a way that works so well for them. So it's wonderful to hear Trey be able to talk about Jerry that way and recognize him. And I'm sure I'm echoing the frustration of a lot of deadheads who have become late in life fish fans. But for God's sakes, man, play a dead tune every now and then. Show us what you can do. If there's anybody out there who's qualified to do it, Trey, it's you. You played with those boys. Come on. We're all waiting for you just to break into a shakedown street one night. It's going to happen. So let's make it happen sooner. Um, the next one who has a quote about Jerry is a guy who boy, it's kind of hard to describe exactly, what Ken Kesey means to the movement and to the Grateful Dead and to so many of us really who for whom he opened, and kind of unlocked our brains and really showed us the other side of life and what happens when you push past the point where your parents always say no. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was an amazing book, and I read it when I was much younger, and it didn't mean nearly as much to me as it did when I read it again when I was much older. The, the story, as much as just his wonderful style of writing and the way he conveys that whole story. But that's Ken Kesey 1.0. Ken Kesey 2.0 is the Ken Kesey who moved up to Oregon and bought the farm and bought the further bus and created the home base for the Merry Pranksters, uh, who definitely were the movement that gave birth to the Grateful Dead by way of all of their uh, trips festivals and um, acid tests that Thomas Wolfe wrote about in the Electric Kool-Aid acid test. Which, if you have never read that book, read it because whether you're a Dead fan, whether you're a psychedelics fan, it doesn't matter. He's a great writer. It's a very great story, and it really conveys a lot of wonderful things about both Ken Kesey's community, from which the Grateful Dead emerged as the house band for the acid tests, and then continuing through to the Grateful Dead, really becoming the main attraction, and so many people being there and enjoying themselves uh, with a slightly altered perspective based on this wonderful drug that Ken Kesey was so instrumental in helping unleash on the masses, if you will. Right up there with Owsley Stanley and some of the other guys who were really at the forefront of uh, making sure that people who wanted to take their own little trip had the ability to do so. Ken Kesey is just such an important guy in so many ways. And he says, Jerry knocked a chunk out of the wall and let the sun shine through. And it's up to us to keep that light shining through, or someday we are going to have to answer to him. And I like how he puts that at the end, right? That wherever we're all going, Jerry's going to be there again. And, that's a wonderful thought. Comforting in some ways, not the ultimate comfort, certainly. As we grow older and we have loved ones and everything else like that. But certainly nice to know as a deadhead that if there's a possibility to catch up again with Jerry somewhere else in another dimension in another time's forgotten space, and hear what he can do now, or who knows, maybe we can do it and he listens to us, right? But whatever it is, um, it's all pretty cool, and you know, uh, uh, love that about Kesey. The last quote that we have is from a guy who really was Jerry's right hand man for so many years, and with whom he and Jerry wrote so many wonderful tunes, so much beautiful music that we all still listen to today and love so much. And that, of course, is Robert Hunter, who we lost earlier this year, late last year. And only Robert Hunter could say it this way. So here's Robert Hunter's quote about Jerry Garcia. I feel your silent laughter at sentiments so bold that date to step across the line to tell what must be told. So I'll just say I love you, which I never said before, and let it go at that, old friend. The rest you may ignore. Well, nobody says it better than Robert Hunter, and nobody says it better with Jerry Garcia than Robert Hunter. And I think that's a beautiful quote about Jerry, and one that really resonates for me, and one where I think maybe it's time to say, okay, enough of that. Dan, I think it's time to talk a little marijuana. What do you got for us today?
Smoking them wildwood flowers got to be a habit. We never seen no harm. We thought it was kind of handy. Take a trip and never leave the farm.
Yes. Who is that, Dan? Jim Stafford. Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, this is good stuff that you found, and thank you for finding that stuff and playing it. It always puts a smile on my face at this time of day. So today we start off with an article from our friends over at Marijuana Moment. Thank you very much. Telling us that a key Senate committee says that federal law blocks marijuana and psychedelics research due to Schedule 1 restrictions, at which point we all want to completely gag and puke all over ourselves, because are they dragging us back into this classic catch-22? Well, let's turn to the record and see what it says. A Senate committee, the Appropriations Committee, has approved a spending bill that contains sections encouraging the expansion of federally supported research into marijuana and psychedelics, while also expressing concern about barriers to studies that result from the substance's ongoing Schedule 1 designations. The panel further noted that scientists face limited access to sources of cannabis, suggesting that they should be able to study the actual products consumers are purchasing from state legal dispensaries. The Senate Appropriations Committee passed the legislation which covers fiscal year 2024 funding for labor, health, and human services, education-related agencies, and its attached report language last Thursday, advancing it to the floor. In addition to the research-focused drug policy sections of the report, there's also language in the underlying bill, this is the part that we love to hate, that prohibits the use of federal funds for any activity that promotes the legalization of any drug or any substance included in Schedule 1 under the Controlled Substances Act, unless there's a significant medical evidence of a therapeutic advantage. Okay, let's parse this out for a minute, as my old high school English teacher would tell us, right? What are they saying here? It's on Schedule 1 because it has no significant evidence of therapeutic advantage. How would we discover that significant medical evidence of therapeutic advantage? By testing it. But guess what? It's on Schedule 1, so you're not allowed to test it, right? Sorry, guys. This is on Schedule 1. The only way to get it scheduled off is to test it and show otherwise. But oops, you can't test it either. Okay, Richard Nixon's been dead for a long time. The Controlled Substances Act served its purpose for a time. No, it really didn't, but it made certain people feel like it did. But now we just have to say enough, right? Because marijuana, please, go talk to all the people who use medical marijuana. Go talk to all these people and all these studies, another study and another study and another study that we read week after week after week. People have pain relief, increased styles of living, more energy to go out and do things. I mean, these are all wonderful things for which they are no longer having to take hard medical drugs. So you can't say that this is not producing a therapeutic advantage. It just is. And to say it's not is to be willfully blind, and to say, that, nope, sorry, we're going to put form over substance here, and we're just not going. We're going to keep our eyes closed and stick our fingers in our ears and yell really, really loud, nah, 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 and we're going to pretend like it doesn't exist. And you can't make it exist, because the only way you could make it exist would be by doing something illegal. So you better not be testing it, because if you are, you're testing Schedule 1 and go straight to jail. Go, do not pass go, do not collect $200. You're done. Go off to jail. So, look, hopefully what they really mean by all of this is that they're going to find a way to get this nonsense taken care of, so that we don't have to keep having these ridiculous, stupid, artificial barriers that, anyone is perfectly capable of understanding and looking at and seeing, and saying, this is just stupid. It's just stupid. My wife gets mad when I say things are stupid or I call people stupid, but this is stupid. There's no other way to describe it, honey. I'm sorry. It's just stupid. The only stupid people would rationalize in the way that the federal government tries to rationalize about marijuana. So stupid is as stupid does. And yeah, that's Forrest Gump or something, but he was smarter than them. So come on, federal government, pull your head out of your ass, get it right, and let's figure out how to move all of this forward without buying into these old, silly, nonsense talking points from back in the day that there is just no medical advantage. It's such a lie that you insult us every time you try to point that out. Now, here's an interesting story, and I like this one because, at least on the surface, it seems to solve a problem. And on a deeper level, it screws the government. So amen to that. This is from our friends over at MJ Biz. And we appreciate all of their great news and services and providing the happenings of the day in the cannabis world to people out there, so we can all see and take advantage of it. In this article, they point out that there might be people who have a solution to our common enemy being 280E, the tax program that unfairly taxes cannabis businesses. And we've talked about forever with my former host, Jim Marty, who is one of the early pioneers in cannabis tax accounting and fought many battles with the federal government over 280E and how to expand the cost of goods sold, which is the loan deductible component that dispensary owners who are engaged in the retail sale of this Schedule 1 product. So what happens? Well, a growing number of marijuana businesses are taking advantage of a tax strategy that might reduce the costly financial burden imposed by Section 280 of the federal tax code. Small businesses with a gross income of less than $27 million are able to deduct expenses to a near legal degree, according to accountants specializing in cannabis. By one estimate, marijuana companies paid nearly $2 billion more in federal taxes than mainstream businesses. Why? Because you can't deduct your ordinary business expenses. So you're paying taxes on, 66% instead of 33%. It's insane. But not all certified public accountants are on board with using the relatively new tax strategy, and they warn cannabis entrepreneurs that using it can be risky. So Section 280E currently prevents plant-touching companies from deducting many traditional business expenses because marijuana remains a Schedule 1 controlled substance, and it's illegal under federal law. In recent years, a growing number of accountants and professionals specializing in cannabis discovered a small business provision within 2017's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The provision, called Section 471C, was designed to simplify accounting for inventory and cost of goods sold for businesses with less than $25 million in gross income. For example, if a business wants to include 100% of its facility costs in its inventory calculation, it could do that if it is based on the company's books and records, according to one accountant based in Oregon who did a lot of work on this. In other words, a cannabis retailer can include expenses associated with renting a storage facility for inventory in its cost of goods sold. For some businesses, the tax savings from including such expenses under inventory costs could be significant. We can get taxes down to near legal levels, the accountant said when being interviewed. According to him, costs disallowed under Section 280E do not disappear. They just cannot be deducted under the old accounting methods. But under Section 271C, the limitations of the old accounting methods no longer apply, and some of the costs can be recognized as cost of goods sold. This creates the possibility of recapturing costs that were previously disallowed under 280E before the use of the 471C method. But again, while a growing number of CPAs are using it, there are still a number of accountants who won't use 471C, arguing that 280E disallows any kind of deduction and will invite an audit even if you try and put it under this other section. Now, I'm not an accountant. I don't pretend to be an accountant. Certainly not smart enough to be an accountant. And one of these days, I'm going to reach out to Jim Marty because we haven't had him on in a long time, and we're going to bring him on board and see if he can explain all of this to us in a way that makes some sense and would be helpful for the smaller people. Now, understanding, of course, when they say 27 million gross, a lot of small operators would be thrilled to make that. But if that totally knocks out the multi-state operators because they're pulling in gross numbers that are gross. I mean, they're very, very large and far larger than that, so they don't get this small business benefit. But it is interesting to see that there are still accountants out there who have not given up the fight and who are still looking and searching for ways to beat the government at its own game in this. And hats off to them, and more power to them. And if you're operating a cannabis business and you're plant touching and you think that you might have some 280E liability, I would advise you to absolutely positively go out and talk to somebody who has experience in cannabis accounting. It has to be cannabis accounting. It can't be your uncle's best friend from college who's a really, really good accountant, because cannabis accounting sections don't apply with regular accounting. These are completely different things, and somebody who's not a cannabis accountant would never have any reason or excuse to ever be dealing with them and may not know or fully understand the implications of these sections of the tax code. But you should absolutely be getting professional advice if you are a plant touching company, particularly if you're a dispensary and you are selling it at the retail level. The third story I want to drop in today is a great story for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a hats off to Minnesota, and why not? They have now enacted a legalization act that many feel could become a national model. Thank you to my good friend Andy Greenberg, a very good friend of the show and frequent guest, who sent me this article a few days ago. She is a Minnesota native, and good buddy Mikey, who took me to my first show, is a Minnesota guy, and Libby and the whole crowd up there. So I always like to give a hats off for Minnesota. So let's look and see 5 ways that the experts believe that Minnesota's legalization could be a national model. Okay, point number 1: possession, consumption, and home grow are all legal. So starting as this was passed, which I believe is August 1st, so we're now 3 days into it, adults 21 and over are able to have up to 2 ounces of cannabis flower, 8 grams of concentrates, and 800 milligrams of THC edibles in public. Those will also be purchase limits at adult use dispensaries. The limit for flower possession at a private home is 2 pounds. That's pretty significant. Adults can also opt to grow their own cannabis at home. Each household is allowed 8 plants, 4 of which can be flowering at any given time. Plants must be in an enclosed, secure area that is out of public view. That's a decision being made to deter crime. It's a smart decision. So this all sounds great. Everything starts on August 1st. So again, 2 days ago. So this would be day 3. And I like the part about being able to have up to 2 pounds at home. In Illinois, patients are still limited to 2.5 ounces. So that's how much you can buy at a dispensary at a time. But if you already have an ounce at home and you're going to buy some and bring it home, you could, according to the rules, you can only buy 1.5 ounces. Here, to be able to buy up to 2 pounds to have at home could be significant for people who have conditions that demand larger doses and larger quantities of medical cannabis for them to be able to use. So that's a good point. Point number 2, defining where you can consume may be tough. Okay, so it effectively makes public consumption legal, but there are a few exceptions. Now, that's notable right there because most states effectively made public consumption illegal, and then we would find a few exceptions. So, in this case, and I have not had a chance yet to talk to any of my Minnesota counterparts to get the inside story on what's going on with all of this. But my read about that is that, you should be able to smoke it in a public place, except for where? Well, multifamily dwellings. Okay, well, that's apartments and condominiums. So they may have to leave their building if they want to smoke or dab, which is interesting because in Illinois, you're really in a tough spot because you can't go outside to smoke or dab because you can only smoke or dab inside out of view of the public. But they also say that, if you live in an apartment building, which a very large percentage of people do and who live in the city, that, you need your apartment owner's permission to do it. And if the apartment owner has a mortgage and the bank that holds the mortgage for the for the landlord says, nope, no way, we won't let you have marijuana on the property because we don't want to run the risk of government forfeiture of the property, because that's our security for you to repay your loan. And then the landlord comes back and says, hey guys, look, I'm really sorry. You can't smoke in your apartment. But in Illinois, you can't. I mean, technically speaking, you're not allowed to go outside and smoke. You can't smoke in your car. That really leaves you with nowhere to smoke. But here, interestingly enough, it looks like they are saying that even if you can't smoke in your apartment, you can leave your property. You can go outside and you can smoke. I'm sure that as more rules are enacted, they'll address that a little bit more, and things like public transportation, in schools, sporting events, where there's large crowds gathered. So we'll see where it all breaks out at the end. But so far, that's interesting. Now here's one that is a little bit funny for me, and it makes me wonder, because it says cannabis sales are currently limited to tribal dispensaries. While adults may be able to have cannabis as of August 1st, it may be difficult for them to get it. It could be early 2025 before dispensaries open, as the state takes time to flesh out the license process and the licensure process and regulations. However, indigenous tribes in Minnesota have been given a head start and may opt to open adult use dispensaries essentially as soon as they'd like. So far, 2 tribes in the northwestern part of the state have decided to take advantage. So this is fascinating, right? Because remember, point 1 in this of the 5 things said, starting today, adults 21 and over are able to have up to 2 ounces of cannabis flower if they can find where to buy it. So, that seems to me to be a little bit of a bait and switch, and I'm not sure why it's going to take all the way until 2025 to get dispensaries open. This is August of 2023. Most states aren't Illinois, and now not every state can be Missouri that did it in 87 days. But for God's sakes, if Missouri could do it that fast and Arizona could do it that fast, it shouldn't take Arizona, the better part of a year and a half before they can get dispensaries open that aren't located on tribal lands. And while I'm all for allowing indigenous people and indigenous tribes anywhere in the country to be able to sell cannabis and benefit from it just like everybody else does, I can't believe that in Minnesota it has to be such a long time before the regular Minnesota citizen is just going to be able to walk to a dispensary like we can do now in Illinois, like they can do in all the states that have legal cannabis. I know a lot of people in Minnesota, they're just waiting. So as soon as they get the green light from the government, let's start opening up those dispensaries, and we can make an evening of it in downtown Svenski. Okay, the third point, automatic expungement of criminal records starts immediately. Now, this is just good. Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension will begin automatic expungement of lower-level cannabis convictions right away. Over 60,000 Minnesotans may be eligible, but officials believe it may take up to a year to clear the backlog. No state has made it automatic, one of their representatives explained. Every state has made their people petition to get the expungements done, which we didn't feel was the right way to go. That's going to completely free up the lives of so many people. Felony convictions may take a bit more work to erase from individual records. A cannabis expungement board will soon be formed and will determine eligibility on a case-by-case basis. This is great. This is just fantastic. And there's just no other way to say it. They're absolutely right. Every other state, they've put the burden on the individuals to A, be aware of the fact that there's an expungement program, and B, to have the sophistication to know where to go and how to fill out the forms for an expungement program and how to present it, and C, otherwise to have enough money to be able to pay somebody else to do it for them. And here they're saying, nope, we're the government. We're going to take care of it. And that's just wonderful. I applaud them for that. And that is something that any state model should look to emulate. Even if you're a state like Illinois or Colorado or California or any of the states that are already up and running, there's nothing that says you can't change when a better idea comes along, and that's a great idea. So it would be wonderful to see more states consider that. And then, of course, the fifth point about the Minnesota statute is it has a ban on synthetic cannabinoids. Products containing synthesized cannabinoids like HHC and THCO were outlawed earlier when the governor of Minnesota signed Minnesota's recreational marijuana bill into law. However, they continue to be sold in smoke shops and hemp dispensaries across the state. According to a Minnesota attorney, that will likely change this fall. All hemp businesses must register with the state by October 1st. Otherwise, the attorney believes that a crackdown could come soon after. There's still an issue with enforcement. I expect there will be more once the state knows who's selling it, the attorney said. So, look, synthetic cannabinoids, okay, fine. Although some people say that also includes Delta 8. So, of course, we have to be very careful when a state wants to start eliminating things. From a health and safety perspective, I have no problem with it. But from a business perspective and let's get the people what they want and and what they're really looking for perspective, I'm not as fond of that type of a system. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens in terms of where they go with that. But Minnesota legal cannabis are now on the table. Make your way up to the land of 10,000 lakes, but just make sure you find the right one out of 10,000 where they have an Indian tribe, so you can go and buy your flower marijuana, because it sounds like you may not be able to do it in any other part of town. Now, I'll check in with the Minnesota crowd and find out if I'm misreading all of this. And if I am, well, you can be sure we'll be back quickly to change that and to get the correct news out there. But either way, again, it's great to see Minnesota doing it. I'm going to be with a lot of my old Michigan crowd up in Minnesota this fall when the Wolverines head out there to play the Gophers in the continuation of the Little Brown Jug series. I believe it's the oldest rival trophy in all of college football. This is not a Michigan podcast, so I don't need to get into it much deeper than that. But it's a lot of fun, and we've seen the game in Minnesota a few times because we have friends out there. We're all going to get a big group out there this time. And, there may be some stories that come out of that we can share in future editions of the Deadhead Cannabis Show with the aforementioned but seldomly seen or heard Alex Wellens and a number of other people. But it should be a great weekend and a lot of fun. Okay, so now more music, and this is really one of my all-time favorite Jerry Garcia clips. It's every Deadhead's one of their favorite Jerry Garcia clips. Let's hear it. Yeah, any Dead who doesn't know the Morning Dew crescendo, the Jerry solo there from Barton Hall, Ithaca, May 8th, 1977. Go out and have your Deadhead credentials re-examined, because we should all know that. We should all be singing that in our sleep. It was the amazing climactic moment of an amazing, amazing show. And I can just listen to that Morning Dew over and over and over again. And I just love that ending. So, kind of a good way, I think, to wind down today's show. I'm getting the signal from our producer, Dan, that somehow, without a whole lot to talk about, I've still managed to fill up an hour of time. And I guess that's not that hard to do when you're talking about the Grateful Dead and marijuana and other good stuff like that. Um, Next week, I will not be here. I'm taking a much needed and well earned vacation with my family off to the wilds of Glacier National Park. And we'll have a chance to hang out with my kids, still get them to listen to a little Grateful Dead, but be listening to a little of their music too, because that's what you do on family vacations. But I will be back the week of August 21st, and there forward, we will have many more good shows, lining up some guests for the fall, selecting some more Grateful Dead shows that we want to feature, and other good things. Next week, on August 14th, we will be replaying one of our fan favorite shows. A year or two ago, we were very, very blessed to be able to have David Gans on our show. And David is a huge member of the Grateful Dead family, one of the co-hosts of the Tales from the Golden Road with Gary Lambert. And we are going to replay my interview. Jim Marty and I interviewed him. And we're going to replay that interview next week. And if you didn't hear it the first time around, I would very much encourage you to listen to it, because there are a few people alive who know more about the Grateful Dead than David Gans. And he was great, answered a lot of our questions, and just shared some good stuff with us. So look forward to that. I will look forward to talking to you again in 2 weeks. Everybody, from now until then, have a great time. Listen to some Dead. Be safe. Enjoy the rest of the days between, and enjoy your cannabis responsibly. Thank you.
So many roads, so many roads to ease my soul. So many roads to ease my soul. So many roads to ease my soul. Lord, so many roads to ease my soul.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To check out more great cannabis podcasts, go to PodConx.com. Here's a preview of one of our other shows.
99.9% of our DNA is identical. It's a 0.1% that truly makes us different and unique. And that's what the show is about. Find out that 0.1% about your favorite guests. Find out what music they like, their first cannabis experience, and even what their room looked like growing up. But more importantly, or as important, their journey. Learn what makes them unique on Everything is Personal.